Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Trustcast Show. And we're really happy. Um, you know what? Hang on just a second. I'm gonna edit this first part out. I'm gonna ask my video editor to edit this first part out because I pulled out the wrong. Usually this is so smooth. Honestly. Okay. Uh, Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Trustcast Show. And we're really happy to have with us Octavia Martinez, and she is welcome to the show, Octavia.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. Octavia Martinez is a UVA grad and a former felony prosecutor who walked away from a legal career in 2018 to homeschool her kids and run a homestead ranch in the Rio Grande Valley. Then in 2024, a single urgent client call pulled her back, and she launched a solo practice that now takes on medical malpractice, defamation cases, and licensed defense for doctors and midwives, all from the virtual firm with no office, where she's talking to us now. So you stepped away from law for 6 years to homestead and
Actually, it
homeschool.
was I didn't start the homesteading until 4 years ago. So I
Oh,
really stepped away I had one son at the time. He was nonverbal. He was having some developmental delays. And so we were getting him into therapies. And I knew that it was more important for me to be home during that window of time to try to troubleshoot essentially and get him services. And he started improving dramatically. He started preschool in 2020, and then 7 months after he started school, all the schools were shut down and they went to virtual. And I am somebody who's perpetually living in the 90s. I didn't really want my son going to school on a computer.
yeah.
So I said, I could probably just homeschool him. So I started homeschooling, and I actually had a baby in 2020, 3.5-ish weeks before the lockdown started. And so I was like, well, I'm home now. I'm just going to stay with my kids. And then, if you remember, I hate to keep talking about 2020, but there was a run on the stores, there was supply chain issues. So my husband and I just started looking at growing our own food and homesteading and bought a farm, got a milk cow a couple years later, got chickens, got a beef herd going. So we've been growing our own food for 4 years now. With the milk cows, I think we're going on 3 years. So I learned how to make all the hard cheeses, yogurt, all of our dairy. So it's been actually pretty wonderful. And then because I started homeschooling my son when my daughter came of age and she was 4, I started homeschooling her. And then we just recently had another baby almost 5 months ago. So yeah, we're pioneering out here.
So what on earth was in the call that made you come back to start being a lawyer again?
So it was something I always wanted to do, was be a lawyer. I don't want people to think that, I was just sort of drifting through life. Law was always a goal of mine since I was a child. I actually went to lawyer camp when I was 13. I mean, it's probably the nerdiest thing you could do. Most kids, they go to sleepaway camp and they're, running outside and in the woods. I went to a sleepaway camp at Ohio State for like middle school kids, and we were pretend lawyers for the weekend. It was the most fun I ever had. There were real lawyers and real judges there, and we put on these mock trials, and I had the best time. And then, sort of serendipitous, I ended up going to Ohio State Law School. I went to UVA for undergrad. I went to Ohio State Law School, and I remembered throughout law school, hey, this is where I did the sleepaway camp. And always wanted to be an attorney. Being a prosecutor was my dream. Always wanted to be in trial. Loved it. Actually had my dream job when we were living in Arizona. Was promoted up into the major crimes, or the felony trial division. And my husband, who is a physician, he matched in his residency down here in Texas, which is we're in his hometown. And so I had to give
Wow,
it up.
that's kind of
So
unusual.
I quit and moved here with him. And because I happened to graduate law school in 2009 during an economic crash, if you recall, remember that fun time? I was
I do.
25. I didn't have a lawyer job for 2 years. I was working for judges as a bailiff, and you didn't technically need a law degree. The reason why that's important is because when you move to a new jurisdiction and you've been licensed for a long period of time, generally you can just waive into the jurisdiction and not retake the bar exam if you've been practicing 5 of the last 7 years. Well, I had been licensed for 7 years, but because of the economic crash of 2008, 2009, I didn't get my lawyer job till 2011. So they didn't consider me practicing for 5 of 7 years, even though I was a law clerk for 2 judges. When we moved here in 2015, I was pregnant with our firstborn. I had to take the bar exam again after not having taken one in 7 years. So I was pregnant due in February, so I couldn't take the February bar exam of 2016. So I had to study for the Texas bar with a newborn. He was 2 months old when I started studying for the exam. And when he was 5 months old, the age of my current son, we went up to San Antonio, and because I was nursing, my baby had to come with me, and I took the Texas bar over 3 days. So I was determined. So I was practicing here, loved it, walked away, like I said, in 2018. And then in 2024, someone had been accused of wrongdoing to one of their licensing boards, but they were not guilty of what they were being accused of. But
Doctor
what they were,
or
it was a
attorney or what
physician.
kind? Physician.
It was a doctor. And what they were facing, if they were found responsible or liable, was a complete revocation of their medical license or suspension of their license. And they had an attorney, but they were not comfortable with their representation, didn't think that their attorney was necessarily handling the case with the right amount of vigor or zeal. And so they came to me and said, well, you're the only one that would probably really care the way that I want. Can you do it?
How did they know about you to...
It's somebody that I know.
Oh, okay.
So they know how I generally deal with clients and how much passion I have for law. They came and said, well, could you do it? I said, well, I haven't really done license defense, but sure. I mean, if you really think so. They're like, it can't be worse than what I've already got. So they fired their attorneys and they hired me, and I was able to help that person not only preserve their license, but essentially get the case dropped from what they were facing. It took 11 months presenting all the evidence. It was hundreds of pages of records. We had witness statements and character reference letters, and got them exonerated before the board.
And what was the basis of the case, and who was bringing it?
It was an anonymous complaint. I believe we were able to discover that it was made by another physician, but that physician was bringing the complaint based on their opinion of how they felt something should have happened. But this physician had been treating this patient, the one who was facing the board complaint, for 5 years, had 5 years of records to show that they were complying with the statute governing doctors for this particular issue. So we were able to show that this anonymous complainant, who we believe was another doctor, was just wrong based on the evidence. Because all the records show the doctor's complying here, the doctor's complying here, the doctor's complying here. They couldn't really argue that.
So what's the story about, I always hear you should be able to face your accuser.
That is a great question. And I am someone, as you will soon discover, who's generally distrustful of government entities, governing boards. I think 2020 sort of woke a lot of people up to start questioning authority in certain aspects. But that is a very good question. I do not think that people should be able to bring complaints to the medical board or the midwife licensing board, which is a lot of cases I deal with now, anonymously. Because what happens is when a complaint is made, the boards will launch an investigation, whether or not the complaint has merit.
So if you have a personal animus against a physician or midwife, whatever, you can actually launch a complaint with...
Yes. And it will trigger an investigation. It is crazy. And I have several cases where it's a disgruntled former patient where they didn't think that something should have happened, but they may not be actually be correct based on the law. But because they're so angry and they're ginned up on social media, they're bringing these complaints. And what's happening is it's now triggering these investigations. Then the disgruntled patient is then going back to tell people, aha, see, they're under investigation. And it creates this cycle. This is actually how I ended up getting involved in defamation cases, because it sort of takes on its own life form. It spirals out of control. And then you have the provider who's now got to hire an attorney to defend them against the board. And if it's multiple people bringing multiple complaints, then they're being tied up in this investigative process that's not very organized. And then you have these prosecutors who are saying, well, it wouldn't really be a complaint if it wasn't legitimate. So they're keeping the provider tied up in this drawn out system.
So it wouldn't be a complaint unless it was a legitimate. So that's like, well, you're guilty because somebody said you before a complaint.
That's right. And that is the unfortunate reality of how the system is. It's like that too in criminal cases. It's very hard to get a prosecutor to dismiss a case. When I started practicing here, when I moved here and I relicensed here, I did a criminal defense case where I was able to show the prosecutor before, when the charges were first brought, that my clients not only did not commit a crime, there was video evidence that exonerated them. And they just said, well, we'll let the jury decide. They would not dismiss the case.
Wow.
And it wasn't until they were committing constitutional violations with sending an investigator to my client's house, even though my clients were represented by counsel. The state cannot contact a person if they have an attorney. So when I brought that out to the judge, it said, hey, they're committing a Sixth Amendment violation here. And also they stepped into my client's house without a warrant. You got a Fourth Amendment violation here. That is when the prosecution backed way down. But it took me having to raise the alarm with the court to say, listen, the state of Texas is violating this person's constitutional rights to try to bring this case. You cannot do that. And so you see this happen on micro levels with these administrative boards, because they're governmental, they're quasi-governmental. That's how they label them, but they're 100% the government managing the license of these providers.
Is this I don't think that that's the case across the United States. It must be a Texas-based thing, or maybe I misunderstand.
I think we like to think it's not the case, but I think if you talk to enough criminal defense attorneys or constitutional law attorneys, which I do, a lot of my practice involves discussing constitutional rights, liberties, etc., because the government tends to have overreach. They tend to be very oppressive with their hand. And so a lot of lawyers are there trying to push back on government overreach. And when in my defamation cases, we deal with this a lot because the First Amendment comes up, because not only do I file defamation cases, but I also defend people who are being threatened with lawsuits. So I represent a podcaster now who's being threatened by an arm of the government in another state for defamation, and I represent that podcaster, and we're pushing back. Now, this is a private entity, but they have enough government involvement that you could make the argument it's the government trying to suppress the podcaster's speech. But this is becoming increasingly common, unfortunately. And I don't think enough people realize that, because when we go to school, we're given this idea that the government is there to help you and to make sure that everybody is safe. But people don't want to face the reality that the government is functioning for the benefit of itself. It's not really there for the benefit of people. And so in order to keep the government's interests, it will sometimes, and many times, operate in a way that is extending too much pressure or power over people in situations that it shouldn't.
So your website says you challenge institutional power with necessary force.
Yes.
Was that always your approach? Or, I mean, did it change after you were dragged back into
Yes.
not dragged back. Did it change at that point?
Yeah, well, it actually changed. The reason why I left practice in 2018 was because of this issue. I was so disturbed. That criminal case that I referenced, where I had clients who the prosecutors were sending their police force out to their house, entering their house without warrants, refusing to drop the case when it wasn't a case, talking to them without me present. And people here, other attorneys, because I was new to the area, I would bring this up and they would say, you're just upsetting the status quo, you're upsetting the prosecutor, the attorneys that I worked with. And I said, our job is to our client, not the judges, not the prosecutors. And I was so disillusioned and so disturbed because I felt like I didn't want to lose my license or my integrity to try to fit into this system that seemed to be designed to protect itself, because these were two people facing prison sentences. They had never even had so much as a traffic ticket. And here they were dragged into this criminal justice system, and it was completely unjust. So that's actually why I left in 2018. I said, well, if I'm going to have stress, I might as well just be stressed out at home.
So speaking of at home, so you run this firm virtually.
Yes.
How does that work when you're juggling, you have the ranch chores, the homeschooling, trial prep, and then the side, as a sidelight, you sleep occasionally?
Yeah, so it helps because my husband is a doctor and he has his own medical clinic. So he manages his own schedule. And so he sees patients in the afternoon. We do all of our home stuff. He milks the cow before he goes into the clinic to see patients. I also help him manage his clinic. So I do employee schedules. I'm his office manager. I do payroll. And it's just him and I with the kids. And, we've been doing this now for 10 years, like with me being home with my son, almost 10 years, that we're just kind of used to it. Sadly, after I quit in 2018, my mom and dad came down here for a vacation, and my mom died while she was here.
Oh,
My
wow.
husband's father died right when we moved here in 2015, and his mother just died February of 2025. So my dad is the only one alive. So it's not like we've had this huge village. We're in that millennial, zennial. We're like not Gen X, not quite millennials, but we're in that group that we're the sandwich between, the boomers and raising our kids. And so we've just gotten used to doing this without a village. It seems crazy when we verbalize out loud how much we're doing, but we don't really have a choice but to just do it, because my husband always says, if we're not going to do this, who's going to do it?
That's exactly
My
right.
old husband's always like, what's our alternative? It's good. He's like, do you want to work for other people? No. So then we just have to keep doing this.
So you've carved out this niche now, defending doctors and midwives against licensing boards.
Right.
So are your clients exclusively in that niche?
No, I have all kinds of cases. Like, people keep saying you should niche down. I don't. I've done so many different things because I don't believe that and maybe this is naive, and I'm still so new to having a solo practice that I try to operate based on principles. So I do med mal cases. So we sue doctors and hospitals for wrongdoing, because hospitals are institutions. The way that some doctors operate, they operate in a very institutional framework, institutional mindset. Again, I bring you back to 2020, 2021. Remember, doctors really came in the forefront then. People were told you have to trust the science and do what the experts say. You can't question it. Even when there were valid questions about long-term studies and safety and efficacy, you weren't allowed to ask those questions. So I don't believe...
It was really crazy where there was a direct impinge, or in my estimation, it seemed like we were impinging on free speech. You weren't allowed to have a separate opinion.
That's correct. And so I don't believe that there's one category of people or institutions that hold the truth. Wherever you stand in terms of standing against oppression, or making sure that someone is being fairly compensated for something that happens, or making sure that someone doesn't get their livelihood taken away with a false complaint, I will stand in the gap for that person. It doesn't matter what side they're on. I think what happens with lawyers, and it makes sense because they're trying to avoid conflicts, is they'll say, I'm just a plaintiff's lawyer. And then you have just defense attorneys, like civil litigation defense, where they don't believe that any personal injury claims are legitimate, for example. And they have a skewed viewpoint on personal injury attorneys and vice versa. And you have plaintiffs attorneys who think that 100% of the personal injury claims that are brought are legitimate. That's not always the case. There's nuance. And I don't think enough people operate with a lens of nuance to see that it's not just cut and dry on one side all the time. You have to look at the world with a framework where you can sense and discern the nuance and see if there's wrongdoing over here and there's a way to try to make it right. I'm going to step in and help. So I have breach of contract cases where I handle a lot of disputed probate cases where there are people who've had parents, the parents divorce, and one of their parents remarries. The parent that remarried dies, but they have significant assets. Well, the new spouse of that deceased parent will then try to cut out and disinherit the adult children, despite the fact that the deceased parent had documented desires that they wanted their kids to inherit certain things or have certain assets. And so now I have to go after the widows or the widowers to make sure that they're not disinheriting their deceased spouse adult children. I have quite a few cases like that.
So how do you, since you have all these things going on in your personal life and you're running the farm and you're watching kids and having more kids and helping your husband run his medical practice and tending the farm, and how do you get new clients? Where do you fit that in?
A lot of it is mostly referrals. Other people have found out and they'll call me, other midwives, the word gets around, and then people are just finding me. Like I just recently started running ads. So I honestly don't know how I was popping up for some people to find me before then. They just found me. So I have to think it's like divine intervention that these people are finding me. But that's how they're finding me. I'm doing ads now, but majority of my clients are referrals.
So if you're running ads like on Facebook or Google or...
No, I'm not on Facebook. I only recently just got on Twitter or X, but we're doing Google ads and local services ads. Yeah.
Local services ads. Okay, so those are more reasonable because the Google ads, if you're going per click, can be pretty onerous, right?
Yeah, I have somebody that I call him like my operations guy, but he is helping me manage that. So he's setting up all the ad campaigns. He's scripting down the intake really well, and it's actually working out well. He does such an excellent job, but he's basically taken that off of my plate that I couldn't even tell you how he does it or what he's doing. But calls are coming in.
Yeah, that's good. So when you get somebody who's potentially a new client, how do you discern, who do you want to take, and what happens if the ads start bringing in too much business? Or
so I have paid consultations that weeds people out up front because a lot of people don't want to pay just to speak to a lawyer to find out if they have a case. And because I haven't niched down into just a handful of practice areas, for a lot of the cases, it's still not easy to tell just from a phone call, a 30-minute consultation, if they have a case. So I'll offer them a comprehensive case review, which also costs. I take a retainer for that. And that allows me to review everything that they have in terms of what they're calling their evidence documents, if I need to talk to witnesses. And then we examine that based on the law to tell them, here's what I think your best steps are moving forward. You can either make a demand. I don't really think you have a case here. You're welcome to get a second opinion, or let's make a demand. You can file a lawsuit, or let's do a demand for retraction of a statement, depending upon what the case is. For the licensed defense, those are generally people who are coming because the complaint has already been there, so they need an attorney. And those are a little bit more straightforward because usually they're given sometimes only 7 to 10 days to respond to the complaint. That's it. So then I have to get in, do a notice of appearance, ask for an extension for 2 or 3 weeks so we can get all the medical records, so I can talk to witnesses, and then prepare a response and defense on their behalf.
So are you looking to grow your firm, or are you pretty well set the way that you are solo practice?
No, we're in the process of scaling and growing. I would say right now with our metrics, I'm basically breaking even enough just to cover my team. But my goal in doing this is to bring in enough that I can start paying down our student loans, because My husband and I are both in our 40s, and we still are carrying our student loans from law school and med school. So I'd really like to get that off of our back.
So would you be hiring other attorneys in your growth, or are you just looking to fill up your
Probably. I have a
calendar?
law clerk. I'm waiting for him to get his bar number, but he's obviously my first choice right now. He does
Yep.
great work. Really happy with the work that he's producing. He's extremely intelligent. He's very fast. So I'm sort of waiting on him to get his bar number so he can jump in here and start doing these things face to face. Because right now I am the only attorney in the firm. And so if I have to make appearances, it's just me. If there's depositions, it's just me. If there's court hearings, it's just me. So I want to be able to, I'm basically been training him on a lot of my contingency cases. And then I would like him to be able to jump in too. So that'll be cool.
So what does a typical day look like when you're balancing case deadlines, appearances, homeschool
Every day is
lessons?
different. It really is. I mean, generally in the morning, because my son is still waking up multiple times a night, he's still nursing. And then my husband is up with the kids. My older son makes everybody breakfast. And then my husband's going out there to milk the cow. I'm catching up on emails. I'll do consults in the morning. So I have my calendar blocked off that I will only do consults or calls like this if my husband is home, because then he can wrangle the kids. And then he leaves for work around lunchtime, and then I'm with the kids until he gets home around 6 or 7. And I'm doing homeschool with them during that time, putting the little one down for naps. I'll take calls. Generally, I'll be in touch with my paralegal. And so if my hands are tied up, she'll do my drafting for me. I'll just say, hey, I need you to send a letter out that says this. She'll draft it up. I'll look at it, and that's kind of how it goes. And we just do that day in and day out.
Where do you see your practice in 5 years?
I don't know. I mean, honestly, I never thought I would start one. And now that we're there, I'm like, well, if I have the skill set and I have the resources, I should just go ahead and launch the practice and use it to my ability to I really just wanted to make money to pay off student loans. That was why I started. I didn't really have this goal of becoming, anybody special. I just really wanted to pay off student loans. So in 5 years, I hope to be debt free. I really do.
So, what would you tell a young attorney who is thinking about stepping away from their career to raise a family?
I think it's a great idea. I remember when I was a junior associate, the first real lawyer job I got out of law school was at a law firm in Phoenix. And I remember there was a partner who had me working on a case, and she was, I think, 45, which to me, it seemed so old when I was 25, which is hilarious now because I'm in my 40s. But she was lamenting the fact that she only had one child. And she said she wished she would have had more, but she was really trying to make partner. And you could tell she really regretted only having the one child. So she said if she had to do it all over again, she would just have more kids and not worry so much about making partner. And I never forgot that. So I never felt bad about stepping away, because at the end of somebody's life, and I learned this when my mother died, she was only 61 and I was 34. And at the end of your life, the most important thing that's going to be there is your family. A career is fleeting, it's temporary, it's secondary, but permanent, eternal things are the family, the people.
Yep. So let's end this on hang on, let me find my thing. I'm scrambling this on the rapid fire questions, which are kind of fun. So best thing about living in the Rio Grande Valley?
Well, it's very tropical, so it looks like South Florida, but we're in Texas, so it's cheaper. I also live in the county that has the beach, which is nice. So we're right on the Gulf of Mexico, the ocean. It's beautiful. It's warm all year round. We might get a couple of weeks of like cold, cool, but having lived in Ohio from childhood and law school, like I prefer this 100% than having to dig out of the snow and below zero temperatures.
Yeah, I agree with that one. Hardest animal on the homestead to deal with?
Ooh, the hardest animal is probably our dog. We have a house dog. All the other animals are really cooperative. It's our house. I tell people she's grandfathered in from the suburbs, so she's not really your farm dog. The milk cows are the easiest. We had a bull. He was a yearling bull, so he was a year old, but he's in the freezer now. He went to freezer camp because he charged at my husband and chased him down a field. So he only got one chance to do that before he went into the freezer.
So, homeschool subject your kids love most?
My son is very good at math, but they love handwriting, so he's learning cursive. He's 10. My daughter
Right.
loves the language arts, so reading the stories, writing. They love to color pictures and draw, but they love all the subjects. They love history. I just started doing history with my son, so he's loving that. And he's teaching his sister, so I got her a little history coloring book, so they love that too.
Courtroom or settlement table?
I prefer the courtroom.
One thing every person should know about their legal rights.
So it would depend on the context. Yeah, you have these inalienable rights. It's not that somebody has to give you the rights. You have them already. They can't be suppressed or taken from you. Most people think the government gives you rights. No, no, no. You already have them. You're born with them.
So what's playing on the truck radio when you're driving around the ranch?
I don't, is my husband's radio working? I think my kids listen to some Christian radio station, but if it's an old truck, he's got a 20-year-old pickup.
Okay, so I really appreciate you coming on the show. I think we're winding it up. So if someone is in the Rio Grande Valley, so all your clients are around there locally?
No,
Mostly, or do you
actually,
have
most
some?
of my clients are all over the state. I only have a couple that are here. I have clients all over the state, and I've got clients in Arizona.
Oh,
So
wow.
most of my clients are not local.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
that brings in a whole separate subject, but we're
Yeah.
running out of time. Then you got to manage the distance too. So,
A lot of it's virtual and haven't had to travel up anywhere. And even the courts here, I've been able to do virtual if they've had to reschedule, or if my clients are out of the area, they'll let us appear by Zoom.
so that is really the only thing that's really dramatically changed that was a positive thing out of
Yeah.
COVID was the acceptance that you could do a lot more things virtually than previously were even
Right.
considered.
Right.
So if somebody wants to get in touch with you and they have an issue, what's the best way to do that?
They can call my office. They can find me on my website. It's octaviamartinezlaw.com. All my
Octavia
information is
Martinez.
there.
Okay, Octavia, thanks for coming on the show.